Hi, this is Mayor Nate Duckett, the City of Farmington. Tune in today for a special episode of the Mayor's Table where we talk about the 2019 state legislative session with my guest, Senator Steve Neville and Representative Rod Montoya. This is the first episode of two. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, April 2nd, for the second part. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here to kind of give our viewers a recap of what happened in this 60-day session. I know it was a very long and hard session. I made the comment before that we probably should have had a parade of some kind to welcome you guys back because of, I know, all the work that you put in over that time period. So, but you're back now. Hopefully you're recovering from that time. No PTSD lasting effect?
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, definitely thank you guys for carrying the torch and promoting our region's priorities that we had there. Of course, this session we were concerned a lot with energy being one of the top things, tax reform being another thing, and those were two of the major areas that you guys spent time on. But I just wanted to kind of get your view of how the session went, what we can kind of expect throughout this next year as you come into 2020 will be a 30-day budget session, and maybe give viewers who don't pay so much attention to what goes on, the things that they should be paying attention to. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. We'll start with you, Rod. Just kind of, what was your overall view of the session? How did it pan out for you?
Well, it was a rough session. We attacked several very controversial issues, none less controversial than the shutting down potentially of the San Juan generating station. That whole argument and that discussion started early, and it went literally up until second to last day of the session. Quite frankly, it was a little frustrating. Nobody from San Juan County even had anything to do with the drafting of the legislation that got passed, and quite frankly, both in the Senate and in the House, we tried to get that modified to where San Juan County and Farmington considerations were a little bit higher priority, jobs and the such. But there was really an agenda this year concerning a transition potentially away from all carbon-based fuels at some point. So really kind of just the beginning, I would say. This year was really just the beginning of what's going to be a really long fight as to whether or not we continue to be an oil and gas and coal producing state.
I think that is the big elephant in the room. When we talk about a state whose budget this year, Steve, I think we said in 2018 it was 6.2 million, and then this year we had an additional million on there, or billion, sorry.
Well, it took us 10 years to get back to 6.2 billion. A year ago, a little over a year ago, our budget was 6.2 billion. That's what it was in 2008. We had taken a big dip through the recession, and it took us all those years to get back, and then all of a sudden in 1 year we had a $1 billion plus increase in 1 year, which now everybody thinks that that's the new norm. And unfortunately, knowing what oil and gas typically does, we've got to be more cautious about what that is. We spent it all. I mean, if there was no resistance to spending all the money, we did keep a large reserve, to be fair. We kept a large reserve, a 20% reserve.
Okay.
We do that as a matter of safety because we know we do have some volatility, and there's still enough old heads in the Senate that understand the volatility that can happen, that we were able to ensure that large reserve is in there. Otherwise, who knows, if we'd have kept a 5 or 10% reserve like we have done for the last several years, no telling what could have happened to us if oil crashes another year out from now. Sure. We anticipate another $1 billion next year, excess money, that we're going to have to deal with. There's no shortage of requests, don't get me wrong. There's no problem spending the money, but we're going to try to keep that 20-some% reserve and at the same time meet the needs of the state. 45%. 45% of our total budget came from oil and gas this year.
Wow.
Of all of the dollars in the state. And despite all of the efforts by the governor and proponents of clean energy, carbon-based stuff in this state is what funds our state. You take that away, we would be in a desperate situation.
That's the part that I find most interesting about all of this is understanding, you know, in your own household, what makes the income for your family, and it's the skill set, it's the education, it's the talents of the individuals who are out earning money. And in New Mexico, the mom and dad are in oil and gas, and,
Right.
and that's where they're bringing home the cash. So, I mean, you talk about 45% of the state's budget was in oil and gas. What percentage then of the educating dollars is also associated directly
It's
with
the
oil
same.
and gas?
It's the same. If we did away with 45%, we'd have to do away with education in the state of New Mexico,
Right.
because 46% of our budget is education. So, you know, if we didn't have the oil and gas, we would basically not have schools. If you want to look at it that way, we wouldn't segregate it that way, of course. But
Right.
if we had to drop back to only 55% of the current revenues, the schools would be dismal, and all of our services in this state would be dismal.
And now, in this year, just in the education changes that happened during the session, how much more did we put towards education than we did the prior year?
Roughly $500 million.
So half of the surplus, essentially.
Half of the surplus
look at it
went to
that way,
education.
went
Now,
to
part of
education.
it's because of a lawsuit. It was called the Martinez-Yazzie lawsuit that happened this last year. The judge came in and said, you're not meeting the needs, particularly of the at-risk kids, which in our case is largely the Navajo reservation area and around Gallup and so forth, poverty areas, rural areas, and those kind of things. To meet that need, we put an extra $500 million, and I'm glad we can do it, frankly, because our educators are not well paid.
Right.
If you ask the superintendent of schools, Gene Schmidt here in Farmington, you ask him what he sees when he goes to Colorado to a job fair or something like that, he offers 35 or 36 or 7 grand for a new teacher with a bachelor's degree. Colorado offers 42, 45. And so we're not getting the best teachers, there's no doubt, in New Mexico. We get the people who want to live here in Farmington for whatever reason. They have a spouse or they have
dual income
some reason
so-
to want to stay here.
Right.
We have a lot of full-time substitutes that are teaching our kids. We have what's the system where they can, if you've got a degree of any kind, you can become
go
a
teach, and then
you can
get
teach
your
and get your
teacher's
certification.
certification
We have a
while
lot
you
of
do it.
our
A lot of
teachers are
that.
doing that. There's
Yeah.
a lot of that. So offering more money for teachers is great. I'm just glad we can do it. I just hope, I have concern about the sustainability of our revenues.
Well, and just stay on education for a second, because the Navajo Nation, Ron, I mean, there's no doubt that when you visit those schools, a lot of those facilities they're old, and they're in need of some love and attention and renovations. Is that where a lot of this money will go, or does it go directly to teachers?
You know, we have student equalization numbers that we go off of to determine how much goes to some of the reservation schools. But that was really one of the issues that was brought forward this year, was that the federal impact aid money that comes in large part to Native American schools across the state, those dollars don't go directly to those schools. They go to the state, and then when the state doles out money, it comes out of the same pot. So it's one of the arguments that that kind of fueled the Martinez-Yazzie lawsuit, was the fact that federal money is going into the state coffers and being distributed to all schools. And so that is still something we're going to have to deal with in the future. Quite frankly, there's a bit of a threat out there from these Native American school districts saying, you know, we're the ones who should be receiving this money, but we're only getting 30%.
They get an extra 25 or 30%.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they've said if we don't apply for it, the state doesn't get it. And the state would still be responsible to pay for those schools. So there's a little bit of a threat out there. So we will have to deal with this at some
The
point.
facility
in the future.
issue is, we have it's called the PSCOC, Public Schools Capital Outlay. And that is severance tax, oil and gas again.
Yeah.
And we take a chunk of the severance every year and we put it in the PSCOC fund. And those funds are the reason why Farmington has a new high school, has a new Piedra Vista, has a new Tibbetts, and Aztec has a new schools, new high school, whatever. All of the schools around the state are being largely rebuilt because we have, again, due to a lawsuit a number of years ago, the Zuni lawsuit, we have funded schools, their infrastructure very well. And so there aren't too many schools. There may be some out on the reservation, but there aren't too many schools around the state that are not being tackled as far
I'll
as
tell you what, Farmington High School is certainly a beacon
Right.
for new schools. I mean, it's just gorgeous. So
To some degree, we really overfunded schools beyond what superintendents believe will be there in the future. They funded new programming for pre-K education, which would require these public schools to go year-round, and quite frankly, that's going to be a real problem. We already have a hard time filling the teacher jobs that are vacant right now, but to do this entire new project and new programming in all these schools would take a lot more teachers, and it would and the costs would go up because it would be year-round, not just 9.5 months out of the year.
So that money, this $500 million increase that we've put into education, that's going to go into year-round programming in the schools?
Partly. It goes largely into salaries. We're raising the entry-level salaries quite a bit.
Okay.
And then we're giving all current educators a 6% raise. There's some caveats on that, but basically a 6%
It's a big deal.
raise. It's a big deal. So educators are going to come out fairly well. We're going to be more in the range of what other states surrounding us are as far as what we pay our teachers, and that'll be a good thing. It'll help. I think it'll help quite a bit as far as us being able to recruit and retain.
To some degree, we spent money on things that we knew were a high priority for school districts, like teacher pay and some in-classroom spending. But we also, in my opinion, we overspent on things that were not even asked for from the school districts. And so that money that's not spent will revert back to the general fund. Some of the superintendents that I talk to are afraid of actually going out there and trying to implement this year-round pre-K, because if oil revenues drop in the future and we don't have the ability to fund them, those are going to be the first programs that probably get cut in the future.
So there's money right now going towards programs that may not even exist. How long do they have to spend that money before it reverts back to general
Well,
fund?
it's fiscal year. It'll revert
So
at the end of
it'll
the
come
fiscal
into-
year.
Okay.
Right.
Good to know.
Which is June to, July 1 to June 30th every year.
So on the San Juan Generating Station component, I don't want to leave that too quickly here because it deals directly with education, in my opinion, on many different levels. Certainly if mom and dad are working at a coal mine and a power plant, they're able to bring home money that then allows their kids a better opportunity to have better nutrition and get into school each day because they have transportation. And of course, we know a lot of the families in our area, there are multi-generations living in those households. And for a lot of the folks who work in those areas, they're not just supporting their core family, they're supporting grandma and grandpa and brothers and sisters. So when we lose jobs at San Juan Generating Station, which is what we went to Santa Fe to talk about, and groups, and I just want to thank all the individuals who work at the coal mine, San Juan Generating Station.
We
and the coal mine who
literally
came
had
out.
hundreds of people show
Yes,
up at meetings.
just repeatedly saw them there. Representatives from the county, Central Consolidated School District, the city of Farmington. It was good to sit in a room full of people that you recognize the true impact of the closure of this plant. It's these folks who are sitting here right now. For what it was worth, I think it was educational, at least on the aspect of being able to sit in committees and to learn that it doesn't really matter if a senator or a House representative believes something is unconstitutional, they still passed it through committee.
Yeah.
And you sit there and you go, what? How can you make those kind of comments and then vote for it? That really bothered me quite a bit. Yeah. But just for our viewers to understand, in regards to the announcement that was made kind of mid-session by our interested party who wants to purchase the power plant and operate it past 2022, they were well aware of the environment that they were walking into.
Right, they were.
This was halfway through the session before they even came forward, signed a letter of intent, and so they knew what they were getting into. and the owners are still doing their due diligence. We're looking forward to the feasibility study that they're going to be pushing for. They're looking for federal dollars to do that with, because the Department of Energy has a program designed for carbon sequestration technology.
Right.
And I think what they recognize, certainly from the federal level, is that coal is going to be a component of energy used worldwide for forever. I mean, until the coal runs out, there's going to be coal being burned. So if we can find a way to burn that coal cleanly, and carbon sequestration is an answer to that problem, then why shouldn't we be trying to do those programs here in the United States, and specifically at San Juan Generating Station, which was in the top 10% of power plants that were this technology could be applicable.
That's right.
So that's the component that we went to Santa Fe with, to say, look, just give us the chance. I know the bill that they were working on, Senate Bill 49 and then House Bill 49, but the Senate bill had been under construction basically for 14 months.
Well, yeah, we had a similar bill a year ago in the legislature that did not have some of the things in it, and I was actually a sponsor of that bill a year ago.
Well, I was going to say, a year ago,
Yeah.
the bill that you sponsored, we kind of lined up and said, yes, if this is the best thing that we can do,
Right.
please give us the $19
It did
million.
not mandate the closure. It
Yeah.
provided for some property tax relief if there was a closure. So there was a lot of things in there that were good for San Juan County,
Right.
accepting the fact that the plant may close, and it may close. We don't
Sure.
know yet, but we're still negotiating, as you say, the city is, not me, but the city is negotiating, trying to come up with a plan, and that's good, but we tried in this bill to get one little paragraph, about this long,
literally.
that literally said that they would make a provision for some kind of a variance or a waiver should we come up with a viable plan to continue the plant to meet the minimum standards that they had in the bill. We weren't trying to deviate from the standards.
Right.
They wanted to reduce the carbon output to a certain point, and our argument was, if we can get below that, let us go. Don't bug us. And it's a little simple
But
paragraph.
the reason the bill last year didn't pass was specifically because it didn't require
Closure.
the closure. And so that's why it got hung up. That's why
Right.
it got stalled.
But this-
and that was also the reason why, quite frankly, they cut out San Juan County legislators from being part of this this new bill, because we were wanting to basically say, there's a lot of jobs at stake here, and the jobs are, quite frankly, more important than the tax base.
That's exactly, and that's very, very succinct, exactly what we said. Even prior to the session, we went up there, I met with them. They said, Mayor, what do you want? And I said, I want jobs. Well, we're not gonna allow for that plant to continue operations. So what else do you want? Well, there's really nothing else I can tell you that I want. I mean, and what they ended up coming out with was $20 million going into economic and workforce development.
But with a lot of strings.
And a lot of strings,
right.
and maybe some replacement power. A lot of what ifs and ifs, or all those things built into it. Yeah. And those are kind of similar to what we were looking at last year.
Right.
So we've made these comments here before, that really where we came out this year is no different than where we were trying to get to last year. But the big difference, of course, is that we were allowed to market the plant for future ownership. We've got somebody who's interested in doing it. We want to pursue that to the nth degree to ensure that we have vetted out every possibility we can of supporting those workers and keeping our tax base whole. I don't think there's any other option for us than to try and do that.
No. And this bill is much larger than last year.
Oh, yeah.
It has a huge amount of environmental stuff in it that actually going to 100% renewable portfolio in about 45 years. Probably technologically it's not feasible at this point to do. Maybe in 45 years it would be, but I suspect that's not even true. It requires battery technology that doesn't exist. It requires all kinds of things that are not feasible or possible to accomplish. And in my mind, they argued otherwise, but in my mind, I think you're looking at doubling, tripling the rates of electricity.
I don't understand that whole component that kept being said again and again and again, that we are going to reduce the cost of people's energy bills.
Right.
Well,
It simply is not, that's not
cannot
played
happen.
out anywhere
It
that
cannot
these
happen.
policies
I
have been
challenged
enacted.
it directly. It came through the Senate, came through the House, and then the last fight we had was on the House floor. And so I tried to put in 5 amendments. The first 3 specifically helped San Juan County. One was a delayed. If they're going to close it down, and they are absolutely hell bent on closing it down, then give us a few more years. So it's not that easy to come and replace a business that is 10% of your county's property tax base. It's not that easy to find that.
Right.
Otherwise, I mean, Lord knows all of the efforts that we've been doing here in economic development. We'd love to bring in an employer of 1,500 people just directly at that site with all of the ancillary jobs. But the last portion, the last amendment that I tried to pass was, and I directed it towards those representatives and senators who their folks are the ratepayers of P&M's base. I mean, we have Farmington Utilities here, so we're not paying what they're paying.
No.
But pointed out that all history has shown that whenever they go up in the renewable standard portfolio, increase it, that the cost to the ratepayers is astronomical. And so I used their numbers and said, you're saying that the cost is going to go down, so why is it that you've put a buffer in there that allows the price to double? There are no cost controls in this, there are no cost measures in this bill, so I am proposing, and it was simple, that the price couldn't go up on ratepayers more than 2% a year and no more than 6% in 5 years. It was simple because they're all saying the cost is going to go down. They fought that tooth and nail. They killed it. They know very well that the cost is going to go up on ratepayers.
They absolutely do. So we could talk about this particular subject in a whole separate episode, probably for a whole month. I just want to just kind of say this: if there was another industry coming to New Mexico that brought 1,500 jobs with it,
they would give them money to come.
They'd give them LEDA funds, and they'd give them tax abatement to do so.
Right.
And the opportunity here for us to partner with the company that wants to come in and put carbon sequestration on it, to me, that's worthy of those types of dollars. You're going to give we gave Facebook $10 million in LEDA, tax abatement for 30 years, and there's going to be 50 full-time jobs there. That's it. So I'm like, well, we're talking a lot more jobs, and the impact that it's going to have, at least in the global, the mentality of we got to stop global warming, we got to stop carbon energy. This is a really good solution that could be used worldwide. So we appreciate your guys' hard work on that. I know it was not easy. Certainly sitting through the hearings and listening to the dialogue. It was a learning moment for me. There's no doubt about it. But for our viewers, know that we're still fighting on that end. The buyers are still interested, and we're going to keep pushing forward. So we'll keep them updated. Just some other quick things here that I had written down. Just interested in your thoughts on. Tax reform was one of the things that we had talked about here as a city. Certainly, hold harmless has been an issue that's been going on now for many years. We didn't see anything happen this year with hold harmless, so that program has stayed the same. Internet sales is another one that's it affects all brick and mortar stores. It affects the tax base, and there was something that occurred with that. Which one would you like to talk about? The internet sale component?
Well, it changed, and I voted for it and against it. Depends on which stage it was at, because the tax bill was a monster. It started off literally as a monster. It was $300 or $400 million tax increases with all kinds of income tax stratus and things like that. When it came over to the Senate, I don't know exactly how it came out of the House, but when it came over to the Senate, it got greatly modified, and it became largely something that was fairly acceptable. It took care of internet sales. Now, nobody wants to pay their taxes on Amazon. I understand that. But the facts are that all of our mom and pops here in Farmington have to compete with Amazon. Even Walmart has to compete with Amazon.
And the shipping companies still have to ship it on roads that are paid for by tax money.
So I think most of us were agreeable that needs to happen. There was a problem with when Trump redid the tax structure on the federal taxes. New Mexico tags on to that, and it's a formula. And because of the way it was done, our citizens were actually paying more tax because of just the mechanism of how it was done. We fixed that's one of the things the tax bill did, was fix that. I don't think anybody objected to that because all of our taxes, well, not everybody's, but most taxes went down. There were a lot of components in that. There was state and local taxes from compensating tax and things like that, where the cities will benefit in the future, along with the internet sales. That includes the local portion of the taxes. So there were some good things in there. One of the bad things that got thrown in at the last minute was raising the upper limit on income tax. Not a real big deal. What is it, $40 million, $50 million, as I recall, something like that. But it signifies something changing. Governor Richardson, Democrat from a number of years ago, had actually lowered all of the tax rates to make New Mexico competitive with all of our neighbors, because our rate was up in the 8.5%. He lowered them down to about 4.9, if I recall. 4.9. Substantial reduction, which helps us.
Very competitive with our
surrounding. This actually raised it to 5.9 on just the upper level alone, but that's the wrong direction. That's the. And that kicked me out of supporting the bill into that one thing was enough to get me to change my mind. There were other things too.
Yeah, we're already having a hard time recruiting doctors and other professionals to New Mexico, and so this is going to make it where we're an outlier again with our neighboring states. But there are two ways to score the tax bill, and obviously, when you have people on TV, they're gonna say it in the way that is most favorable to them. So the governor and the Democrats who really pushed for this increase, they will point to a number like $70 million increase. But what that number is it's just the first year, because as we talked earlier, certain things are going to come online later.
Over a couple of years.
And it only talks about it from the standpoint of money that's received by the state of New Mexico. Obviously, not all taxes are going to go to the state of New Mexico. Some are going to go to the counties and to the cities.
Right.
So once this, as Senator Neville mentioned, it was a real monstrosity when it came out of the House. It was, after fully implemented 3 years out, it was going to be $550 million in new taxes on the taxpayer. So that's not how they score it. They don't score it as to what the taxpayer is going to pay. They just want to score it in a limited fashion, which is how the state will benefit. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you don't even include the municipalities and the counties and what portion that they're going to receive. But you also don't want to look at it when it's fully implemented. For instance, we increased the minimum wage. Everybody is saying that's a $12 minimum wage increase because they're looking at 2023 when it's fully implemented. But when it comes to taxes, to try and make it seem like it's not as big as it is, they'll focus on the first year, 50 million, 70 million, something like that. But in reality, if you look at it, fully implemented, the bill that we passed, fully implemented taxes that will be increased to New Mexico taxpayers is $380 million.
That's funny. I mean, you raise minimum wage, and at the same time, you raise the amount of state tax that you have to
changes.
Pay.
Right.
So it just,
you move up in the scale.
Hands.
Right. People who weren't paying taxes at minimum wage now will pay taxes.
That's right.
Right.
And maybe they're making $8 an hour, just above minimum wage. And now they go to 10. They didn't pay taxes. Now all of a sudden they do.
Right.
There's going to be a problem. We have, it's called the cliff effect, where folks who are low income and receive benefits, and already they have to manage that they can only work so many hours, or because if they go and make too much money, they'll lose their benefits.
Right.
Well, now that we're raising that wage,
they'll either work fewer hours
or lose the benefits.
Yeah, if there was a national headline here last week that McDonald's is no longer going to fight minimum wage increases. And you think if you're McDonald's, you're the #1 hamburger retailer in the world, and you can afford maybe to pay more. But guess what? Mom and pop can't, and you end up pushing those people out of business.
If you've been in a McDonald's lately, they don't have many employees,
And they can afford the automation,
right.
Which is the other part of it. They can afford the automation that mom and pop don't.
A $12 minimum wage is going to be a lot harder on those small towns too, because all they have is.
And I proposed several amendments to that particular bill to make it not applied out of certain populations, the smaller counties, or to delay the implementation a little longer, stretch it out where instead of going from 750 to 1050 right away, which is is it October or it's real quick, it's fairly soon. Make it a year out so that at least the hamburger joint that is in Clovis, New Mexico, or wherever it is, has a chance to adjust their prices.
It was scheduled for October, but the last change in that bill was to make it the 1st of next year.
January, yeah.
Because there was going to be a problem for all of the all of the businesses that contract with the state, that they contracted at the minimum wage as it is currently for whatever percentage of their employees are on that wage. But if they had to increase wages in October, they might not be able to make it to the end of the year.
One of our local home health care companies was actually looking at
Well, it was a big
virtually
deal.
shutting down.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't and they increased Medicaid to offset that, what they're going to get.
They can
refunded
redo
them.
the formula for Medicaid and get that reimbursement in there.
That's good. And thank you for tuning in to part 1 of a special edition of the Mayor's Table. We'll be airing part 2 of our legislative recap tomorrow, April 2nd, so stay tuned.